Welcome to the post-election edition of The Public Square. Not a lot of sleep going on around the table. We're recording this broadcast the day after the election, talking about what happened and what we can learn from it. Straight ahead on The Public Square, I'm Alan C. Duncan with Dave Zanotti, Rob Walgate, Melanie Elsey, and Dr. Jeff Sanders. Here's Dave.
Thank you, Alan. Here we are. And I just noticed I walked past the television set that had the Fox News Corps on. Some of those same people I was listening to at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they look fantastic. Me, not so much.
They've got hair and makeup. So
Yeah.
I guess that's where they were since I wasn't. Yeah. My job was stick my head in the shower, wipe it off, and then get back on the line.
Right on.
That's kind of the way that we are. Okay.
I was debating shower, and I chose against it. So we'll see.
I brushed my teeth.
There you go.
It's now the day after, and we have a lot to talk about. And with great anxiety, the idea was we knew we would come to this day without any idea as to what the outcomes actually would be. Now, we've done a lot of research over the last 12 hours trying to catch up, but it's vast. There are so many subjects that were touched upon in this election, and what we're going to try to do here is to do some debriefing, and this is going to come up on air pretty quick. We're pre-recording. It's the morning after. We've gathered at the American Mission Center. I'm in the studio in Nashville, calling in, and so we're working our way through all of this, but it's going to be a while. I'm going to tell you it's going to be a month before the nuances and the fine points and the understandings of this election really come forward. And so this is not a celebration moment. I mean, we're not throwing a party this morning. We're trying to figure out what just happened and what does it mean. And so we're gonna talk it through straight up. So let's just start. Let me throw this open to the table. Let me go first real quick on the thing that I had been worried about, concerned about, troubled, not because I was rooting for one candidate or the other. Yes, I cast my ballot for a candidate. I don't disclose that. It's because I don't ask you. It's neither of our businesses. But yes, I had strong convictions about who I thought was the better choice. But that's not the point. The point is that my concern was, how are we going to know who's actually voting and what does that mean? And no pollster was able to capture or at least release data that would give us an idea of what the turnout model would look like. They were all chasing the kite in the wind. That is a very significant point about what just happened in the 2024 election, because First Analysis tells us that Donald Trump had 3 million fewer voters back his campaign in 2024 as in 2020. But Kamala Harris had 15 million fewer people vote for her campaign than voted for Joe Biden in 2020. Those are very significant numbers. Very significant numbers. So that's the first thing. Why the turnout models never became apparent, we don't know. Why the polls were all locked in the margin of error, I'm now convinced was, one, for entertainment value, two, to be used and abused by media outlets, depending on how they wanted to shape the story. And then number three, I'm convinced that they didn't know the turnout model, so they didn't want to get outside the margin of error, because if the turnout model did what, in fact, it did do, show a significant change on either side, and 15 million votes is big. I mean, Biden got roughly 80 million. This is almost 20%, right? Rob, am I getting that right? 80 million is 8 million is 10%.
Well,
16 million is 20%. She dropped 15. She almost dropped 20%. No poll incorporated that.
No poll did incorporate that, and I don't think that anyone really had their finger on the pulse of what was going to happen when the evening of November 5th came about. I mean, because there were so many polls saying so many different things, and dare I say, the crazier the poll, the more media attention it got, which was obvious over the weekend before the election when the poll from Iowa came out. And they were talking about it. And I'm like, listen, I looked at that and I read it and I'm like looking around, and obviously the first person I text is Mike Wilbur to give him a hard time about this poll. I'm like, have they been to Iowa? Like, do they know what's going on there? So I think that was a bit of the craziness and wackiness we saw in the 2024 election cycle.
Well, I've been hearing for the past, 3 or 4 weeks that people were, people in the news were speculating that there would be fewer people voting this year than 4 years ago. I don't know how they came up with that, but when I looked at the numbers this morning, I went, well, somebody saw that coming.
Well, I think one of the reasons is obviously 2020 being the COVID election year and the number of mail-in ballots and the number of things that were done that kind of state legislatures around the country looked and scratched your head and said, wait a minute, do we want to conduct an election in this fashion where we are ceding control to people on the outside? And what I don't mean by the voters on the outside, I mean organizations and voting gathering. Did they want to do that? So you saw laws change in a few states and some they didn't really make an adjustment. But at the end of the day, some could say neither of the candidates drove people to the polls.
So we've got that big turnout drop, and that's a very significant deal. Now, of course, I know that the folks listening on the public square are really bright. We have great honor for our listening audience. And at least, I don't know how many thousand of them have been shouting at the radio. Maybe that's because the last election was fixed. Now, that's kind of, those are words that people have used. I want to be careful with the words that we use because we have a responsibility to everybody that's listening. But I think it's okay to ask the question, did that big drop happen because of the way that mail-in voting was conducted and the way that the Democrats positioned their dollars and their employees and their people in 2020 to get that kind of a turnout? I think it's possible that would be part of what happened. So I don't think you can take that off the table. So go ahead, Melanie, you were going to jump in there.
I think that another element that makes this a situation where we're not comparing apples to apples is that over the last 4 years, the secretaries of states have been cleaning off their rolls and removing people who weren't either eligible to be there in the first place, or they were deceased, or for whatever reason. I think the voter rolls themselves tightened over the last 4 years, which would make a difference in the actual number of votes cast, from one election to the other.
Well, the good news is that the numbers are significant, which I think would be a second point of analysis. This was not a close election. Where Donald Trump in 2020, this is a little bit of more early morning brain fog, folks. You think you've got 2020, 2022, 2024. How do you get all those digits with twos in them in the right line? All right. In 2020, you had Donald Trump losing an election in 3 states. That if he had won those 3 states, he would have been the president of the United States. He lost in 3 of those states by a combined total of less than 35,000 votes. Mm-hmm. Now, that is a tiny fraction of a turnaround circumstance. So when we saw the strategy developing for 2024, we said, well, look, this is kind of obvious. If Trump outperforms in those 3 states, there's a clear path there to winning. It would be the narrowest of margins in the Electoral College, but it would be a significant victory. Well, so you start looking across what happened, and you start looking for those states where he won by 5,000, 10,000, 30,000, 60,000. And what you find is him winning by 80,000, 100,000, 200,000. There was a substantive and significant turnout. And the margins, and turnout is as important as non-turnout. Now, clearly, if she had 15 million more votes, and those 15 million votes were spread liberally across those 7 battleground states, she'd be president of the United States. But she didn't.
What I think is fascinating are the anecdotal stories, and I'm hoping that we, throughout this broadcast, we can touch on some of those, because the families or the individuals who voted for the first time ever, or hadn't voted for anyone in years, or, especially like if you think of Western North Carolina, where they had to overcome so many obstacles to even be able to cast their vote. And yet, like in Ohio had almost a 70% turnout. But that meant that almost 2.5 million people did not vote who were registered to vote. So it's really fascinating to me when you think about who cast their vote for one party or the other, as opposed to who didn't vote at all, still in what we would consider a very consequential election.
Melanie, yeah, just to jump off of that point, to me, the amazing thing, you hear the word realignment being thrown around a lot last night. To me, the amazing thing was Trump overperforming with Hispanics and black men.
Yes.
And so it's just interesting for someone who had been called Hitler for so long and a lot of his voters being called racist. It was just very interesting to see that there was a real groundswell of support for the Trump campaign from minority voters. And so I think that racist rhetoric needs to be taken off the table at this point today.
And on the flip side, at one point in the evening, CNN showed a national map with the question, where did Kamala Harris outperform what President Biden did in 2020? And there wasn't one single county in the entire country where she outperformed him. Not one.
Yeah. Well, and to put just kind of a stupid meme joke on this, because I do think that's another point we want to get to is memes and media. But I saw a meme that said, it's got a Democrat saying, am I out of touch? And the answer is no, it's the minorities who are white supremacists now. So I think that's got to be a part of the evaluation as the Dems look forward to their next election cycle.
There's so much to cover. We'll keep this going. Alan, get us to a break, please, and then we'll come back and we'll keep at it as long as we can. As long as we can stay awake, we'll keep going.
All right, grab another cup of coffee if you need, and we'll be right back for more of The Public Square after this short break.
We will be right back for more on The Public Square.
We're back with more of our post-election conversation on The Public Square. And Rob, I'd like to hand it over to you.
I know no one's going to be surprised. I'm going to bring sports into the equation, but I felt when I was watching the coverage on election night, and I switched between all the channels from Fox to MSNBC to CNN, just see what everyone's saying. And what was interesting to me, and this goes off maybe what you were talking about, Alan, is we know in sports, the day after a game or the week after the game, you're watching the film because the film doesn't lie. It's what I tell my players all the time. The eye in the sky doesn't lie. It's going to expose you. You're going to see the flaws. But when I heard the discussion when it was decided on the presidency, there wasn't a lot of self-reflection on the part of many on the losing side. They weren't willing to say, oh, these are the mistakes we made. It was just like an extension I felt of the campaign where it was blaming others or name calling and saying it's someone else's fault that this went this way, not, hey, we could have done this different. Hey, defensively, we could have done this. Offensively, we could have done that. No, it was, hey, they were wrong. They did this. And I'm like, wow, it just seemed there was a big out of touch moment.
You know, there was somebody who on the losing side, I think provided really good analysis, but it was 6-8 weeks ago. And it was James Carville. I saw an interview with him. He saw this coming and he said, this is what they're doing wrong. This, and this. And they're not willing to come to this conclusion. They need to start doing this. And they never did. I mean, so I think there are people out there who are on the Democrat side who are willing to take a good hard look. It's just, are their constituents willing to listen to it and then to change?
Well, I think it's important that we remind people, because there are so many new listeners every week, that the organization that you're listening to, the American Policy Roundtable from the American Mission Center, is not a Republican or Democrat organization. We do not take money from political parties. We do not take money from candidates. We do not endorse candidates. We do talk about what's happening in our country and how are we relating one to another in regards to our personal responsibilities in regards to what it means to be both a person of faith, a believer in Christ, and an American. Because when you're born in this country, certain rights and privileges are afforded to you here. And that's a responsibility that you have from the minute you take your first breath here. So this is where what we're concerned about is the future of how we deal with one another. And part of how we deal with one another has to do with governance. Now, some interview I did in the last 48 hours, I likened the presidential election every 4 years as realizing that you actually have a brain aneurysm. And the only question is, will the pressure of the next 3 weeks blow your brain up? And I think we've gotten through another election and we haven't had a national aneurysm, but we got really close. The pressure was huge and the division was huge and the concerns were huge. But now getting away from it, even just getting away from it one half a day, you can begin to see the distance in reality between what all of the legacy media, the traditional media, including Fox News, what all of them were doing to all of us, and the distance between their messaging and what happened on the ground on the day and the night and the weeks ahead of the election. When the voting began, people began to exercise their will and their responsibility independent of these media sources. They were playing catch up from that point forward. And all of them were confused by what they were observing. In fact, the Associated Press for years has been I don't know how they got this title. I think it's just historical tradition. The Associated Press for years has been the organization that accepted or claimed or took the King of the Hill responsibilities to declare the victories in the states. In other words, this group could say it, that group can say it, but until AP confirmed that it was in fact a victory, it wasn't a victory. AP didn't say boo the night of the election. Right. They didn't say boo.
That's fascinating, Dave, because I think this is the first election, until you just now said that, it dawned on me that this is the first election. I never even went looking for AP's standings.
Mm-hmm.
I just realized that.
That's funny. I followed the New York Times and the AP. I was checking them both. I lived with the Times a little more. Their layout was really good. And it's funny. To me, it was kind of like the last gasp of mainstream media. To me, you could put a lot of titles on this. And I think the death of mainstream media is one of them. I think people got their news and talked to each other on X. I think they went on Rumble, on YouTube, on all these different social media platforms. If you were watching those places, you could get a sense of how this was going to go. If you were watching CNN, you had no clue how this was going to go. That's right. The real people were over here. Real people were over here.
I was watching Dan Bongino last night. That's the only one I looked at. I didn't look at Fox, CNN, ABC, nobody. He was calling each state accurately an hour and a half before everybody else did. And he was giving all this other information. I know I couldn't have heard anywhere else. And
my strategy
I missed out on anything.
My strategy was very different. I stuck with 270 to Win website, combined with checking the Secretary of State's live election results, straight from the source. So I didn't even use any of the media sources.
That's smart. You guys might find this cute, though. My kids were super into this early on until they fell asleep. But Caleb, my 9-year-old, grabbed my laptop from me and I was looking at the New York Times site, and he was looking at each state, and he was clicking it. He was zooming in. He was finding features I wasn't even aware of on their site. And he was very into tracking this. I was trying to explain to him the Electoral College. Kind of think of it like points for each state. I was trying to explain it to a 9-year-old, and he was loving it. It was really fun to do that with him.
One of these days, I'm going to write a how-to book.
You should.
What can you do with children to help teach them
in your spare time between 12 and 6 a.m.?
I think it was interesting that when you see over 50% of the country voted for one candidate, yet all major print media, yet all major network media on television don't have a representation for the most part of that side of that candidate. And and then they wonder why people aren't watching them or why they're going to Exeter or those other places. Once again, they refuse to look in the mirror.
It was not a good night for the traditional media sources. It was simply not a good night. Now, the Bible talks about giving credit where credit is due. And it's not easy for me to give credit to the New York Times. They've been around a long time, and they print a lot of stuff that I really don't agree with. But I think, Melanie, what you just talked about defines, for the most part, what these newsroom analyst boards, panels, whatever for the television channels are doing. I think they've got the Secretary of State's numbers, and they're all using the New York Times because the New York Times is so wired. And they have an algorithm that last night so far proved to be flawless in every one of their predictions based on the voting models of the states. They predicted every single outcome, and I don't think they got any of them wrong in regards to the presidency, and they got a lot of them right in regards to Senate seats. It might have been the whole world is using the New York Times. Nobody's giving them credit, so I'll give them credit.
Yeah, their site was really user-friendly.
Yeah.
I'm on it right now looking at U.S. House races in the map that they have done, and they have it done very well in each state, and you're able to scroll over and see the states that still have votes yet to count. It's I'll tell you what, though, is odd. There's this one state all the way on the bottom right of the United States, down in that southeast corner. They don't have any votes, it seems, left to count or any races in limbo. It seems like that state was able to get their work done rather quickly.
You're talking about North Carolina?
Yeah, they seem to be in that position from about 9 o'clock last night going forward.
No, Florida.
Oh, Florida. Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're overachievers when it comes to counting votes.
Well, we're saying something nice about the New York Times. Can I say something mean about them?
Oh, please. And I'll double down and help you out.
Back and forth. So if you go to nytimes.com, their homepage, essentially their, quote, above the fold today, see, they got their numbers right. But then when they start editorializing, that's when you start to fall off a cliff a little bit.
A lot.
Their headline is Trump storms back, stunning return to power after dark and defiant campaign. So they're not exactly a nonpartisan headline for what happened over the past year.
So we've got a lot more to talk about, particularly, and by now, a lot of this stuff has become much more obvious, but there are things that are not obvious I want to get to so we don't miss them. Like, let's put this question on the table. How good a night did George Soros and John Podesta and Eric Holder have last night in regards to the agenda that they have, that they're trying to move through the states that nobody's talking about? They had a lot of stuff on the ballot last night and some people on the ballot. I think folks will be surprised to find out how it actually turned out. So we want to go there in just a minute.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's take a break right now. And then when we come back, Dave, let's get into that conversation. I can't wait to hear what races you're looking at. If you missed any part of this program, you can find it at thepublicsquare.com to re-listen or share it with a friend. Again, that's thepublicsquare.com, and we'll be right back for more after this break. Stay with us.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the public square.
Welcome back around the public square table. I'm producer Alan C. Duncan with Dave Zanotti, Jeff Sanders, Rob Walgate, and Melanie Elsey. This is our post-election show that we're recording the day after the election, talking about what happened and what we can learn from it. Here's Dave.
Melanie Elsey, this is a test. You're allowed to fail it and still be highly respected, but I'm guessing you know. Prosecutor in California on the election of November 6th.
George, are you talking about the district attorney, George Cascone?
District attorney. See, she's already got me. She's got me correcting my terms. I can't.
Yeah, she's
can't
correcting
get her off
the
her
test
game, no matter
itself.
how little
George Soros is probably his favorite person serving in any office anywhere, lost his
Handpicked
reelection bid.
and funded. I think he lost last night, right?
So he did lose. He lost to a gentleman. I don't honestly don't remember what the ratio was, but he is now out of office.
So that didn't work out so well.
Right.
Okay. Let's see. Issue 1 in Ohio was the gerrymandering issue that Soros and company were openly giving millions of dollars to try to put through to change the way Ohioans pick out their districts. And I mean, it was a boatload of money coming into the state. And the people that rose up to
I think
oppose
it was 40 million or something like that.
Yeah, there was just it was a fractional opposition in regards to money. Rob, how'd that one turn out?
Roughly 54% of the vote against issue 1.
So it was
defeated.
defeated.
It went down, and tens of millions of dollars, as you mentioned, were spent saying how great it would be. I think it was puppies for all if it passed.
And
Yeah.
what's really makes me so thankful that it failed. It was probably the worst ballot issue in terms of trying to figure out how to draw district lines, district boundaries for election season. Ohio had gone through 2 constitutional changes in the last 5 years, and both times to make the process bipartisan and transparent. Both times, though, it was successful with over 70% approval, and yet they came back again and tried to take out all of the elected officials from the process and randomly select citizens with no accountability. Even if the districts were horribly drawn, there would be no way to have any accountability for those who made those decisions. So it was a very poorly worded ballot measure, and I'm just so thankful.
Now, what's really important about that particular ballot measure it represents one of the attempts of the Soros-funded network to get into the states and deconstruct the way people do voting and the way that they draw districts, and so that the mechanisms of the Center for American Progress and the Progressive Movement dominate elections. So they're kind of catching you when you're not looking, flanking the process, changing the process, and believing that nobody will ever catch up with them. Well, the people of Ohio, in this case, caught up with them. Now, they weren't the only ones who caught up with them. One of my favorite things in America, right after trying to understand the meaning of Bitcoin, is trying to determine how you describe ranked choice voting. And ranked choice voting had a really bad night on November 5th.
That's wonderful. Yep, that's wonderful.
Is that like voting in tiers? I mean, like segments?
Oh, I don't know, Jeff. It's like Bitcoin. Make your first choice, make your second choice, and then cast your ballot. We'll let you know who won. What? Okay. So it's. And I believe there were at least 3 instances where ranked choice voting was on the ballot, either to bring in or to take off. In every case, to take off, to change the law and throw it away. Alaska said we were doing it, we're not doing it anymore. And I think there were 2 other rejections of ranked choice voting as well. So that's 3 states that threw it away.
Good.
So, the regime of John Podesta and the Center for American Progress and all of their cooperative allies, they got beat a lot in this last election. People are waking up to them.
Well, they are. And I think when you look at maps across the country, there's also the realization that, again, when it comes from the media, we hear every election cycle, it seems, they're talking about someone in Texas is going to make a move. Someone in Texas is going to turn Texas blue. And they always end up falling short based on their liberal progressive policies. And then you look at other parts of the country, I'll use Minnesota, for example. I'm like, wow, it's interesting to me in Minnesota, they have 8 members of the U.S. House, and it appears 4 of them will be Republican and 4 of them will be Democrat. If that was a conservative state that would have a 50-50 split in the U.S. House, that the left-leaning media would be talking about it nonstop, saying, oh, they're moving the state, they're moving the state. The problem is when you look at the actual map and you dive into the numbers about what's happening, you see the reality that the mainstream media refuses to accept.
Dave, I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about iVoters a little bit because iVoters, I think, did something very unique. We have always allowed people to see the candidates on their personal ballot in the viewpoints through their websites and their social media pages. But I think what we did through iVoters was on a different level was to provide the ballot language, the links to the actual ballot language. I stood in our precinct voting location where they have on the wall it was issue 1, pages and pages and pages. It was such a complicated issue, and that was just the summary language. They didn't even have the worst details in the summary language. So if folks aren't familiar with iVoters, you can get on right now and look at the ballot language in the different states all 50 states. If something's on the ballot, we provide you a chance to actually read the language that you will not see when you walk into the booth.
Well, I want to congratulate Rob and Melanie. I want to congratulate you as well and your whole team that worked on iVoters, because I think between your advertising strategies and the way that you were able to reach people in their daily lives, and the fact that, once again, you conducted a nonpartisan site the goal was to inform people based on a vast array of information and to make it simple and get their homework done. I think you did a phenomenal job, and I know a lot of people are going to be very appreciative for that effort. Jeff, you look like you're trying to jump in here again.
No. I'm enjoying the conversation. I'm like just sitting back and tuning in, and I'll jump in a timely manner. Believe me, I've got things to say.
Well, Rob, you mentioned people talking about Texas turning blue, things like that. Now, Ted Cruz was in a very tough battle, tough race. A lot of money spent in his race. But one of the things that if you're watching the game film back is you've got to look at, again, Hispanic voters turning out for him. And so to me, this just makes me think about the entire immigration issue. Obviously, we need to secure the border. You cannot have cartels and drug traffickers and human traffickers flooding across your border and running the border. But I do think that it is possible to win Hispanic votes. Conservatives and Republicans can win Hispanic votes, provide better candidates, provide better policies, make people's lives genuinely better. And I think that you can win folks that traditionally you never thought you could.
Yes, Alan. And you say in a tight race where a lot of money was spent, I think people viewed it as a tight race only because the mainstream media was saying that. Yeah. Ted Cruz won by nearly 10 points.
Crushed him.
I mean, he drilled him. I feel like it's a replay. It was Beto O'Rourke 2.0. Like, hey, this guy's going to come take Texas when they're talking about Colin Allred. And that just wasn't reality. But he did have a strong contingent of voters, Hispanic voters, as you mentioned. And they are, when, people in the Midwest are talking about the border. People in the North are talking about the border. But people in Texas and Arizona, are seeing it, living it firsthand.
They are the border.
Every day.
It's going to impact how they vote, and it did in these instances.
Well, it would be an amazing thing if in his final term as president of the United States, Donald Trump would be able to assemble a coalition that could be representative, sit them at the table, and for as many days as it takes, come up with a genuine series of principles on how we want to go forward, and then objectives on what laws it will require to do that, if it will require any law at all. Because we have enough laws now, if we understood them correctly and enforced them, maybe we don't need a law. What we just need is a commitment. But to resolve this question, what a perfect opportunity, because he's not going to run for office again. He doesn't have to worry about reelection. And this is a solvable problem. We've got to, so I could get off on that all day. Maybe, just maybe, there'll be a window of opportunity, something worth praying over, that we could resolve this issue finally.
I think one thing he'll do almost immediately, and this is a little bit of speculation, but I think he's going to probably designate the cartels as terrorist organizations.
Oh, yeah, that would be a great step.
Which would change the strategy in eliminating their involvement along the southern border.
You can get the feds involved.
Different
when
tools
you do
involved, different strategies. And then secondly, his deportation policies that he's already mentioned.
Thanks, Melanie. So much to talk about. We'll keep going when we come back for more of The Public Square. Please stay with us.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to The Public Square.
You're listening to the post-election edition of The Public Square. Here's Dave Zanotti.
Let's talk about the question of abortion, the wedge issue, the issue that the Democrat machine, and again, we're a nonpartisan organization. There's a Republican machine, there's a Democrat machine. So please understand, we use both terms without prejudice, nor do we believe that either of these two parties single-handedly can fix the problems that we have. And nor do we play into the mythology that all of Americans are a part of one party or the other. We know that's nowhere near close to true. All right. So we're playing the game at the 2.0 level, where it really is not where it used to be. So let's talk about the question of abortion. The Democrats believed it was a wedge issue that would deliver Kamala Harris the election. They based that on watching what happened post-Dobbs in a couple of very reactionary moments right after the decision where a couple of states got ballot issues up and the pro-abortion side won. And then a few more states, and then they went to Ohio in 2023. Now, that was a watershed for what they believed was their future success. They invested a boatload of money. They buried the pro-life leadership when it came to money in Ohio. And Ohio had some money to run this thing, and they didn't know what they were getting themselves into. They got into a huge firefight with the money coming in from the left. All right. So the issue is approved in Ohio, surprisingly, and it is a horrible issue. Next to the language in New York, the Ohio Amendment of Language from 2023 is absolute disaster. And so what they did was they looked at the tape, Rob. They looked at the tape and said, look what we did in Ohio. Let's do that in 2024 in all the battleground states that we possibly can. Let's put abortion issues up where we can, and let's just make it our theme. Whether we have an amendment or not on the ballot, let's just make abortion our theme, because look at how far it got us in Ohio. Look at what it can do. But they made a fundamental mistake. In a general election, a presidential election, the people who are coming to the polls are not the same people with the same set of interests that will come to an off election year in a single state. Totally different voting paradigm. They booted it because as a wedge issue, it didn't work.
It didn't work. And in many of those states that didn't have ballot issues when it comes to abortions, voters could understand and see that when it was talked about in U.S. House races and United States Senate races, that there's not going to be national legislation that deals with this issue. It is back to the states. But that didn't keep the Democrats from continually running ads saying, hey, this is how it's going to be. This is what's going to happen if they get into office. And there were people that are moderate voters or even that are kind of like scratching their head and said, wait a minute. They're educated. They understood that Dobbs sent it back to the states. It wasn't going to operate that way. They overplayed their hand.
But there were also some other issues on the table that were overshadowing the whole abortion thing. For example, I talk to people all the time in various businesses who are being crushed economically by the inflation. I'm not talking about rich people. I'm talking about poor people I talk to. That was something that I think swamped the whole abortion issue, that and immigration.
Once again, Jeff, the difference between bringing out a ballot issue that is the only substantive conversation that's happening in the off election year, so you can focus on it, you can dominate the state with it, you can make it almost like a game that gets played, like a board game. But in a general election for a presidency, it's one of many issues. It's like somebody forgot to teach them that. They missed that class in consulting school.
Well, and that's why our listeners know that we were very much against the last Ohio issue one and campaigned against it. I really wish that had been on the ballot this time around. It's just very sad that it was in the off election year the way it was.
Well, and Alan, to your point, the proof in the pudding in this theory, this isn't just pontification. Here's the difference. One of the reasons I love doing radio is so much closer to the ground than television. Like, we don't have hair and makeup the day after. We got to drag ourselves in and just do it. All right. But we not only have to talk to people where they are, people talk to us. They're accessible. You can't get to the talking heads on television. We are in the business of this business every single day. on the ground, whether it's electoral politics or legislative politics or litigation or whatever it takes, circulating petitions, going to school board meetings. This is what we do. So we have a different perspective. And for that, we're grateful. And we accept that responsibility to tell people what's going on behind the scenes. The proof of this conversation is in the very same state that a year ago passed some of the most radical abortion language in an off election year into the state constitution. Bernie Moreno, who opposed that measure and consistently spoke against it and spoke out for the pro-life position in a statewide Senate race for the United States Senate, this year defeated an icon of Ohio politics, Senator incumbent Sherrod Brown, who had been in government for 50 years. And Bernie Moreno, running his first time, dumped Sherrod Brown in the same state that voted for the abortion amendment, and Moreno had the courage to attack it, and he won.
Yeah, an abortion in Ohio is in the state constitution, as we mentioned, from the 2023 election. And the Brown campaign consistently ran commercials that had Moreno using pro-life language, saying how supportive of pro-life he was, knowing that Bernie Moreno is never going to vote on a piece of pro-life legislation at the federal level. But that's what they used the entire time. Meanwhile, you have a family of 5 who the mom goes to the grocery store every week and sees her bill is going up by 10, 20, 30, on some items 50%, 60%, but yet they continually talk about the abortion issue and didn't address how things that are impacting Americans every single day.
And all the pollsters were saying it was by 1 point, and he beats him by 6.
I think it's also important that we explain a couple of things to our listeners on those ballot measures. In Nevada, I think it's important that people understand that even though Nevada passed a constitutional right to abortion on their ballot measure, it does not take effect unless it gets voted on the second time. They have to vote again in 2026 or it dies. Secondly, in Nebraska, they had 2 measures. One was to protect life, protecting unborn children from abortion in the second and third trimesters, and the other one was the opposite, the right to abortion. When you have 2 competing measures on the same issue, 3 things have to happen for the measure to win. The measure has to get more than 50% of the vote, at least 35% of the total voters, not just those who voted on the issue. And they have to be, you have to have more than the number of votes cast on the competing issue. I don't think either one of those measures are going to pass. Well, it's possible the pro-life one will, but the pro-abortion one already failed in not getting 50%. So there's more to the story in Nebraska, so don't let the media fool you to thinking that there was a sweep on the abortion issue.
And perhaps most significantly, the measure failed in Florida. The abortion language in Florida failed after being massively funded by the pro-abortion industry. It failed in Florida.
That's good news. You're listening to the post-election edition of The Public Square. If your station has to leave us now, you can hear the remainder of this program at thepublicsquare.com. For everybody else, we'll be right back after a short break. Please stay with us.
We will be right back for more on The Public Square.
Our final few minutes together today on the Public Square. Sometimes we call this the So What segment of the broadcast. Dave, what are you thinking? What can we learn post-election?
What does all this mean, and what do we do about it? Well, if our attitude is an illustration or a fallback to a position that Israel took in 1 Samuel chapter 8, which is give us a king to fight our battles for us so we can go do other things, we're in big trouble. Anyone who thinks that what happened in that election is going to take care of what's ailing America is completely misdiagnosing what's ailing America. What we need to do is to look at how the political opportunities have opened up in regards to this election, and in some places have closed. And what we need to think about, at least what I'll be thinking about personally, and I believe our organization together will be thinking about, is how is God calling us to serve, to love our neighbor in regards to the realm of civil government? Because every one of us is responsible for the civil government of America. Voting is a part of it, but now the voting's done and the leadership has been selected. How can we help those people find real answers to real questions and enact those into policy that works for the common good? We know not everyone's ever going to be happy all the time with decisions that are made, but how can we solve problems now? Through service. And I'm telling you, anybody who sits now, thinks I can sit back now because Donald Trump's got this, please don't buy that.
Have you seen this movie before?
Oh, good question.
No, I mean, there's a lot of people that say there are comparisons, even though I know Donald Trump hasn't served his second term, but a lot of people are saying there's comparisons that going from 88 to 89 when you had Ronald Reagan, stepping away, Bush Sr. stepping in. Everyone thought all is right with the world. The United States is going to be perfect and we have to do nothing. I mean, now the work begins, right? Now there's work to be done.
Yes. And if you have to do the work, and we have to do the work on the ground, the windows of opportunity. Now, I think people are awakening, and it's not just about it's not a person, it's not a personality. I think people are recognizing we've got real problems and we have to get leadership that's going to do it. But political leaders are only a piece of the puzzle. Most of the problems are solved by what we do, all of us together. That's why we pray. Secondly, we got to pay attention. If you stop, if you suddenly go back to binge watching, okay, and you move from binge watching the cable news back to some of those other places, that's no good for any of us. Okay, and it's now is not the time to schedule a vacation. Now is the time to get to work.
The left is back at work right now. George Soros is not taking a vacation. John Podesta is not taking a vacation. They are strategizing.
They didn't sleep last night either,
second.
Jeff. Yeah, they didn't sleep last night either. No. And they've got a plan. And they've got a plan. So the nation is still in the midst of a very risky transition, but there are significant signs of hope. And I would submit to you that what I saw was in about the last 6 weeks of the election, it just seemed like young adults, like grown-ups, started showing up saying, I don't normally do this kind of stuff, but I don't like where we're heading. And I've got to get involved. I've got to do something.
It's my country.
And they didn't just go vote. Yeah. They went out and try to find 10 other people to go with them. But voting is not enough. Because the leaders in Washington can't fix these problems. They can try, they can start, but they need help on the bottom. Melanie, this is where you lived your whole life. Am I right?
You're absolutely right. And you have to take into consideration that we have a role to play every day in how we pray for those who are serving in elected office. This is the perfect time, even as we have new individuals coming into office, to find out who represents you, get on your state's legislative website, call your county board of elections, figure out who your person is, send them a note right now, today, tomorrow. Send them a note to say, I'm glad you're serving. Our family is praying for you. Please let us know if there's anything we can do to help. Regardless of what party they're serving in, maybe they'll send you a card back, maybe not. But you need to reach out and establish who you are in their district at the state level and at the federal level.
There are going to be lots and lots of opportunities over the next 4 years for people to get involved and do things. The first thing is you pray. The next thing is you pay attention. I hope that means you'll stay connected to the public square at every level that you can, that you've got our monthly newsletter, because we'll be alerting you in key spots in the country where you can get involved and you can get engaged. Some people right now, I believe, should take this as encouragement to run for public office. Don't start in Congress. Start at your local school board. Start at city council. Start as a township trustee. Get involved and get in the process and let other people know you're in it. And some pastors, I think, might be ready to hear the message that every congregation, along with elders and deacons, should have public servants a committee of public servants that are a part of congregational life who go out and serve their communities. And in so doing, they're evangelists. They're salt and light in the marketplace. They don't become worthless to be tossed out and thrown out by men. They're worthwhile because they serve.
And that's where it's up to us to make sure that we're talking to our neighbors, to our friends, to our families, because it takes all of us. You can't check in once every 4 years or once every 2 years and say, hey, I did my duty and I did my part. This is a process. As Melanie said, continue to follow up, continue to build those relationships. And I'll share the story. I know I've shared it on here multiple times of our friend that ran for state rep the first time. And he went to all those township trustee meetings and he was the only one there. And he's looking around as these township trustees made decisions, spending millions and millions of taxpayer dollars. And he's like, there's really no one here like involved in this process. They complain about everything that happens in Washington, D.C., but there are big decisions that happen in your backyard as well.
So one action step you can take today, and I'm guessing that most of the people listening haven't done this, get on our mailing list. Come to aproundtable.org or thepublicsquare.com, register for our monthly update, and give us your email address. We'll send it straight into your email box, or if you like it by mail, we print those as well. Now, are we going to ask you for money in the mail? That's not what we do. We'll tell you where needs are and how you can participate and opportunities are to invest to make a better difference in this country. But no, we are not going to be soliciting you endlessly, and no one ever has had their information sold from this organization to somebody else. We don't do that. All right, we don't do that. So that's one thing you can do, one step of commitment. And at all costs, please, dear friends, do not think, now I can go on vacation.
Oh, please.
Because the other guys are showing up for work today.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of work to do. Thanks, Dave. Great reminder. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Rob. Thanks, Melanie. And thank you for listening to this special post-election edition of The Public Square. If you'd like to listen again or share it with a friend, visit us at thepublicsquare.com. We'll also have some more post-election coverage over at 1850 Main Street. You can find that program pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts. So once again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time for more of The Public Square.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.